We're going to look at all the changes that might happen realistically in the next 10 years.
I'd say that what's really going to shift science in the next 10 years is about the process of science.
Anybody who says they know what's going to happen in 100 years, let alone 10 years, is talking bunk.
We are going to be, I believe, in an extraordinary era over the next 10 years of actually really reaping the fruits of genomic discovery.
We're constantly living in a tension between what we think the future was and what the future almost is, because the future is tomorrow.
Now, the idea of tonight is wonderfully, fantastically simple. The Centre for Life is 10 years old, but rather than just having cake and looking back over what it's done, we're going to spend more of our time looking forward, although I do think the cake would have been a good idea. We are, in the words of Professor N. Holder of the Slade School of Art, going to look to the future now. It's only just begun. We're going to look at all the changes that might happen realistically in the next 10 years. And there's going to be a lot of help to do this. Now, we've got an cartoonist with us, Emily, who's over there, who's going to be trying to somehow illustrate. She's going to draw us into the future as well. And we've got 4 experts of different stripes who are each going to talk for roughly 10 minutes or so about how they see the road ahead. Is it going to be a multi-lane superhighway or a dirt track? Will there be tolls to pay or barriers to get round? And do we get any say over the route that it takes? Or is it just going to be a question of that we have to accept that wherever science goes, society will sooner or later follow? I have no idea what our experts will forecast or how bold they're going to be. But it's worth saying that besides our speakers, the Centre for Life asked quite a few well-known figures in science. And I was particularly interested to see that Sir Martin Rees, Lord Rees, the President of the Royal Society and the Astronomer Royal, responded to the Centre of Life with his prediction. He thought we'd focus on the search for planets beyond our solar system. And he said, just a couple of weeks ago, this was his prediction, in the next 10 years, rather than detections of planets beyond our solar system being limited to giant planets, we will identify many no larger than the Earth. Now that's interesting for 2 reasons to me. One was, in doing my research for this, I went back and looked at what people were predicting in the year 2000 for what was going to happen in the next 10 years. And there was Sir Martin Rees again. And do you know what he was saying? In the next decade, we may see the discovery of a planet resembling the Earth orbiting another star. If you keep making the same prediction, it may eventually come true. And, interestingly, it just has. I don't know if you saw the news, but 2 weeks ago, it was announced that they found this thing. It's called Gliese 581G, aka Zarmina's World, which sounds like a very dodgy PlayStation game. And it's found orbiting a star only 20 light years from Earth, and it is the nearest we've yet found to an Earth-like planet in the habitable, what they call the Goldilocks zone. So there is Martin saying what he thinks is going to happen in 10 years' time, and it's already upon us. That's one of the tricky things here. So for our first speaker, can you please welcome the Director of the Wellcome Trust, the global charitable foundation that's second only to the UK government in funding biomedical research, and the way things are going may soon be first, Sir Mark Walpert.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed, Quentin. One of the things that you talked about, of course, has happened in terms of getting taller and getting fatter. And, of course, populations have been getting taller around the world, which probably isn't a bad thing, but they've also been getting fatter, and that's a very bad thing, and there are no signs of that changing. And, indeed, one of the challenges for the next 10 years is whether actually we can change that, because, of course, with all of the predictions of us living almost forever, the actuaries may get it wrong again, because if we continue to get fatter, then our lifespan will start shortening rather than lengthening. You asked one thing before, which is whether society will just go along on the roller coaster, or whether that can be averted in some way. And one thing I would say is that I think there are no limits to scientific discovery. And I think that's a very important principle. What we do with that information and how we use it is incredibly important. But you can just imagine the debate over the discovery of fire, which quite clearly has the most terrible and dangerous consequences. but I don't think anyone would realistically think that fire is something that couldn't have been discovered and utilized for both good and evil. I'm going to be quite cautious about predicting the future for all the reasons that you've so graphically illustrated. And I've tried this once before. I went on Start the Year about 2 years ago, and I got it entirely wrong, so I couldn't even get it within a year. I just about got it right that the gorilla genome would be sequenced last year, and that pretty much was. But I asserted that plastic electronics would be well on its way, and that's still got a year or two probably to go before it becomes publicly available, though I think that will be an enormous technological change. And in this week of all weeks, it'll be fascinating to see what the Nobel Prize-winning discovery of those two Manchester scientists in terms of graphene will actually lead to. So I will go back 10 years because this is the 10th anniversary of the Centre for Life, and happy birthday to it, happy anniversary, because of course it's also the 10th anniversary of the sequencing of the human genome. And that first human genome cost about £1 billion. It took about 10 years. And 10 years on, the Sanger Institute just outside Cambridge is sequencing approximately 3 or 4 genomes every day, completely human genomes, and it costs about £10,000. And looking forward over the next 10 years, that is likely to be a further logarithmic progression in terms of reduction in costs. And that means that we are going to be, I believe, in an extraordinary era over the next 10 years of actually really reaping the fruits of genomic discovery. So we're going to understand very much more about how genetic variation between everyone in this room influences the differences between us in both health and disease. And that, I think, is likely to generate some uncomfortable knowledge. There was a great deal of publicity about 3 weeks ago about the discovery of genes that affect ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And it really brought out the ideologists, the psychologists who said, absolute rubbish, it's nothing to do with genes, it's all to do with the environment. And equally at the other end, I think some geneticists who implied that it was all much more genetic than you might think. And it's a bit silly because all of this is going to turn out to be a complicated mixture of both our genes and our environments. But this is going to matter for health. So the Cancer Genome Project, which aims to sequence 50 cancers, the 50 commonest cancers from each of 50 patients from around the world, is going to yield discoveries which are going to be important in terms of the diagnosis of cancer, the management and choice of drugs for cancer, and it will lead to the discovery of new drugs for cancer. And in malignant melanoma, which when it becomes, there are secondary melanomas, is a very nasty cancer, there is now a drug which is in quite an advanced stage of experimentation that followed directly from the Human Genome Project. Now, what's going to happen over the next 10 years is actually of material importance to the Wellcome Trust, because one of our challenges is to fund the discovery of the next 10 years. But what we're not going to do is tell people what to discover, because you can't do that. Funding science is about funding smart people and providing them with the facilities to discover things. And so no one could have predicted the discovery of graphene. If you look at the Nobel Prizes over the last few years, they're about things that you couldn't predict. And that's what science is all about, actually. It's about probing the unknown.
Now, second, we have someone from Newcastle who's very keen to say he was also partly raised in Jarrah. Thank you. Not that you can tell from his accent or mine. And according to his Wikipedia entry, he died earlier this year. That was later corrected, with him adding that he's looking forward to many more years of technology punditry, future dreaming, and good coffee. I can't guarantee the latter, but he is the very alive technology pundit and future dreamer, Bill Thompson.
Thank you. You notice I have both an iPad, because hey, I have to, and my notes. And in fact, this is what I'm speaking from, and the iPad is only here to tell me the time. Most expensive wristwatch I've ever owned. But it does the job, and it's quite a good prop-up for these as well. The thing about science, of course, is it works through challenge and through evidence and experiment. And it looks like Gliese 581G doesn't actually exist at all. Plus, if it does exist, it's the sibling of another planet, which was found 3 years ago, which was believed to be Earth-like. So it's not even the first planet around that star, but they're now re-evaluating the evidence, and in fact, it may not be there. So in the last 10 minutes...
Gliese 581e is the one that's more Earth-like in size, but is very close to the planet and it's not habitable.
Yeah, but it may not actually exist.
See, this thing, all these stories date, the future is changing all the time.
Within 10 minutes. And that, of course, is what we love about it, because in looking forwards 10 years, it's necessary to make a certain number of assumptions that the biosphere will remain mostly hospitable to human civilization, that we won't have any serious economic disruption that throws away the framework for scientific discovery in the West. And frankly, that's a big assumption at the moment, to assume that there won't be one of those catastrophes that challenges human civilization. And we work on those assumptions all the time, but it's useful to recognize that they are there. The people who want to make radical predictions about where we're going to be in the next 10 years generally assume that something will come from outside or that something completely unexpected will happen. And of course, as we heard from Sir Mark, the progress of science is generally very different. It is about building. It is about establishing research programs. It's about thinking sensibly now about the sorts of questions we might want answered and then putting the resources into getting answers to those questions. The discoveries that are made, the earth-shattering discoveries, like the discovery of graphene, like sort of the work that's been done, Dirac's prediction of the positron, things like that, are massive in retrospect. When they happen, they are the starting point of an enormous amount of exploration and innovation and exploitation to get them into the hands of people. The technological innovations that lay behind this piece of kit, many of them are 10, 15, 20 years old. It takes a long time to get from a lab result into the marketplace. And so predicting the future of science is necessarily about slow steps, which when we look back at them may well come to seem significant.